Hi, I'm Dr. Aaron Penix. Welcome to my presentation, Poisoned Islands in the Poetry of Haunani-Kay Trask and Kathy Jetñil-Kijiner. Here, I'm going to consider two poems written by Pacific Native women, Hawaiian poet Haunani-Kay Trask and Marshallese poet Kathy Jetñil-Kijiner. Looking at Trask's 2002 poem, The Broken Gourd, which addresses how foreigners have destroyed Hawaii's environments and native people, and Jetñil-Kijiner's 2018 video poem, Anointed, which addresses America's nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands and the long-term environmental effects and radiation-caused illnesses among the Marshallese people, I show how these two poems present the shore, that low-lying interstitial zone between land and sea, as an intensely contested space between, on the one hand, contemporary colonialist-fueled environmental degradation, evocatively evoked via imagery of rot and destruction, and on the other hand, a history of environmental and indigenous peoples flourishing. Both poems juxtapose contemporary environmental degradation with historical flourishing. Refusing the problematic trope of the beach as a paradise, these two poems present that border between land and sea as a space of cultural connection that unites different islands within the Hawaiian and Marshall archipelagos, but which has also become a space of rot, reflecting the cultural and environmental degradation that has affected these islands, these shores, and the archipelagos more broadly. In The Broken Gourd, Trask declares that the Hawaiian paina, or archipelago, is, quote, poisoned by lost genealogies, property missionaries, diseased heol, end quote, and that the shores have become smelly, with pock-marked vines and rotting breadfruit groves, a common horizon found under spidery moons. In Anointed, Jetñil-Kijiner visits the Marshall Island of Eniwetok and the Runit Dome, a concrete dome that contains 3.1 million cubic feet of radioactive soil and debris, the remnants of 43 atomic bombs detonated by the United States. Shown standing on the dome, Jetñil-Kijiner declares, there must be more to this than incinerated trees, a cracked dome, a rising sea, a leaking nuclear waste with no fence. There must be more than a concrete shell that houses death, end quote. In addition to attending to environmental destruction, both works overturn popular imaginaries as islands as isolated in favor of an environmental and cultural interconnectivity via the ocean. As Epeli Hawai'i writes in his influential essay, Our Sea of Islands, quote, continental men, namely Europeans, on entering the Pacific after crossing huge expanses of ocean, introduced the view of islands in a far sea. From this perspective, the islands are tiny, isolated dots in the vast ocean. Hawai'i overturns this view and argues for understanding Oceania and its inhabitants as intensely interconnected, as a sea of islands. Hawai'i declares that, quote, the world of Oceania is neither tiny nor deficient in resources. It was so only as a condition of the colonial confinement that lasted less than a century in a history of millennia. At the heart of Hawai'i's claims, as well as Trask and Jetñil-Kijiner's poems, are the ways that the colonialist appropriation and destruction of these islands depend on the false belief that the islands are separate, unconnected, and isolated. Since, of course, islands are not isolated, but rather are interconnected by the ocean, environmental destruction on one island affects the people and environments on another. In Trask's Broken Gourd and Jetñil-Kijiner's Anointed, we find a shared understanding of environmental degradation on land that through oceanic interconnectivity spreads like a sickness across the Hawaiian and Marshall archipelagos. Trask, who unfortunately passed away on July 3rd this year, was an author, scholar, and activist who fiercely argued for Hawaiian independence. As Trask notes in the anthology Reinventing the Enemy's Language, quote, since the coming of foreigners to Hawaii, our land has been ravaged, our people grown sick and small in number. Those of us who survive must protect our people and guide our nation, end quote. Trask's 2002 poetry collection, Night is a Shark-Skin Drum, reflects these ideas, and I'm going to briefly read one poem from this collection called The Broken Gourd so that you can grasp its broader meaning before I focus on a few sections. Here we have Trask's poem, The Broken Gourd. As you can see, there are some Hawaiian terms in it, and there are translations for these terms that are included at the back of the text. I've included the translations of the terms here for our ease and accessibility. After the last echo, where fingers of light soft as lead come slowly, toward our aching earth, a cracked ipu whispers, bloody water on its broken lip. Long ago, a wise Kanaka hauled hand-twined nets, whole villages shouting the black flash of fish. Wahinu, trained to the chant of rolling surf, Nakiku, sprouted by the sun of a blazing sky. Even Haina, tinted by love, shone gold across a lover's sea. This night I crawl into the mossy arms of upland winds, and islands moan welling grief. Each of us slain by the white claw of history, lost genealogies, propertied missionaries, diseased Haiol. Now a poisoned Paiuna, swarming with foreigners and dying Hawaiians. A common horizon, smelling shores under spidery moons. Pockmarked Mayo vines, rotting ulu groves, the brittle clack of broken lava stones. Out of the east, a damp stench of money burning at the edges. Out of the west, the din of divine violence, triumphal destruction. At home, the bladed reverberations of empire. In Trask's poem, the Hawaiian Islands are subject to colonial pressures that arrive across the ocean. A damp stench of money from the east and triumphal destruction from the west. These pressures and the influx of foreigners to the islands have created death and destruction for both indigenous Hawaiian people and the environment. Rather than the healthy people and natural fecundity of long ago, we find rot and death, and much like the breadfruit groves are rotting, the people are slain and dying. This destruction is shared among the poisoned archipelago, a common horizon of smelly shores. In this conjoining of different islands and different people, united through toxicity, I am reminded of Stacey Alamo's description of bodily natures, of the ways that toxins cycle throughout the environment, ignoring the boundaries of bodies and borders that underlie so much of Western epistemology. In Trask's poem, colonialist pressures from the east and west and an influx of foreigners become apparent in the rotting breadfruit groves and dying native populations, signs of environmental and cultural destruction. So turning now to Kathy Jetñil-Kijiner's poem, Anointed. Jetñil-Kijiner is a Marshallese activist, poet, and educator. Among her many achievements, she has read the poem Dear Matefele Penem, which addresses rising sea levels at the opening ceremony of the 2014 UN Secretary General's Climate Summit. The poem Anointed can be found on Jetñil-Kijiner's website as both a text and a video poem. Traveling to the Bikini Atoll nuclear testing site via a traditional double-hulled canoe, she found an atoll radically reshaped by the 43 bombs that America had detonated in the 2.26 square mile lagoon. Much of Anointed considers the Runit Dome, a visible manifestation and reminder of the United States' legacy of nuclear adventurism and destruction. The dome, constructed in the late 1970s, shows visible signs of decay. It literally bobs up and down with the tide, flushing radioactive water into the lagoon. Rising sea levels also threaten the dome. Nuclear leakage will be yet one more long-lasting tragedy affecting the atoll and the surrounding ocean. In the poem, Jetñil-Kijiner speaks directly to the atoll, asking, "How shall we remember you?" And here I'm going to have two excerpts from the poem. It's a 6-minute long poem in total, and so just for the sake of time, I've had to have two excerpts here, and then I will speak on those afterwards.
You were a whole island once. You were breadfruit trees, heavy with green globes of fruit, whispering promises of massive canoes. Crabs dusted with white sand scuttled through pandanus roots. Beneath looming coconut trees, beds of watermelons slept still, swollen with juice. And you were protected by powerful Iroij chiefs birthed from women who could swim pregnant for miles beneath a full moon. Then you became testing ground. 9 nuclear weapons consumed you, one by one by one, engulfed in an inferno of blazing heat. You became crater, an empty belly. Plutonium ground into a concrete slurry filled your hollow caverns. You became tomb. You became concrete shell. You became solidified history. Immovable. Unforgettable. There must be more to this than incinerated trees, a cracked dome, a rising sea, a leaking nuclear waste with no fence. There must be more to this than a concrete shell that houses death.
Much as in Trask's poem, we find a juxtaposition here between a fecund past and a destroyed present. I find it interesting that in both works, this fecund past is linked with processes of human procreation. In the Broken Gourd, children are sprouted by the sun of a blazing sky, while in Anointed, powerful chiefs are birthed from women who could swim pregnant for miles beneath the full moon. Fruitfulness is shared between the islands and the people. Similarly, the moon appears alongside the ocean in both poems. In Trask's poem, the moon goddess Haina shines gold across a lover's sea, while in Anointed, the moon appears over swimming pregnant women. Breadfruit trees are also central to both works, described here as heavy with green globes of fruit and whispering promises of massive canoes. On her website, Jetñil-Kijiner discusses how the atoll was historically reserved for food for the community. There was more rainfall there, so it was lush and plentiful with food. Whenever supplies ran low on the main island that housed most of the ancient Bikinian community, they would sell to these islands for further provisions. There were also the sites of massive breadfruit trees that supplied most of the materials to build their wallops, their large canoes that Re-Bikini and Re-Inidwak were known for. End quote. Of course, the nuclear testing ended this. The bombs literally reshaped the islands, and what remains has become repopulated with scrub. Such destruction, however, is not limited to the atoll. Indeed, following the 1954 Castle Bravo test, radiation-laden debris fell like snow onto inhabitants of the nearby Rongelapipes Island. Radiation poisoning was endemic. Within 10 years, 17 of the 19 children who had been younger than 10 when Bravo exploded had developed thyroid disorders, and one had died of leukemia. Cancer and miscarriages were and remain commonplace. As Jetñil-Kijiner declares in Anointed, here is the story of the ways we've been tricked, of the lies we've been told. It's not radioactive anymore. Your illnesses are normal. You're fine. You're fine. The Marshall Islanders' cancer rates remain high. A 2000 study found that lung cancer rates are 3.8 times higher in males and 3.09 times higher in females. Cervical cancers are 5.8 times higher, and liver cancers are 15.3 times higher in males and 40 times higher in females compared with U.S. rates. While Trask and Jetñil-Kijiner are responding to different causes, with Trask addressing the influx of foreigners and Jetñil-Kijiner addressing American nuclear testing, both provide an anti-colonialist critique that challenges contemporary environmental destruction by explicitly juxtaposing such destruction with evocative descriptions of the island's fecund history. In both poems, breadfruit and human procreation function as symbols of environmental thriving, linking people and ecology. Such fecundity is juxtaposed with contemporary scenes of environmental destruction, and both reveal how such destruction is dispersed among the Hawaiian and Marshall archipelagos, affecting not just one island, but all of the people, plants, and creatures that live there. The false belief that islands are isolated underlies the logic of American nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands and the invasion by foreigners of Hawaii. These poems reject such isolationism and argue instead for an understanding of environmental interconnection that extends across the ocean, as well as a sense of stewardship that draws connections between the flourishing of the environment and the flourishing of the people. Returning again to Epli Oafa's Our Sea of Islands, Oafa declares that, quote, there are no people on earth more suited to be guardians of the world's largest ocean than those for whom it has been home for generations, end quote. And we can see here the environmental destruction that occurs when such stewardship is problematically seized from the inhabitants of Oceania. Thank you.